31. I think let's start right now. And by that time, we are hoping that more people will be joining us. So this is track two after the second afternoon keynote speaker. We'll be having Dr. William Brendel talking about charting a meaningful career for advancing equity and inclusion. Let's introduce Dr. William Brendel is an associate professor of organization development and change for the College of Education at Pennsylvania State University. After earning a doctoral in adult learning and leadership at Columbia University, Dr. Brendel went to become a scholar practitioner in the field of organization development. Before Penn State, Dr. Brendel was an associate assistant professor at Texas A&M University, Temple University, and the University of St. Thomas. As I say, the topic will be charting a meaningful career for advancing equity and inclusion. Dr. Brendel will not only discuss the research and framework behind this free assessment, but he will also teach us how to utilize our individual report to integrate DE&I in our career plans, both as part of your own unique OD approach, and if you wish, as an intended outcome of the work. So we have 55 minutes, I believe. So we have allocated the last 10 minutes for Q&A and discussions. I think that maybe you guys can raise or Dr. Brendel would like to highlight. Dr. Brendel, the stage is yours. You can start whenever you're ready.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for being here. One of the things I love the most about doing these sorts of conferences and summits is that OD people are my people. I always feel like a real, member of this community, and I see a lot of faces and names that I see on social media all the time, but maybe I haven't had a chance to actually meet. So it's kind of fun to see that I'm connected with a lot of you that I haven't actually met yet. I also see a lot of really great faces out there that I've been working with for a very, very long time, and I'm really honored that you're here. So let's make this interactive, because really what we're going to be doing is having a conversation about the way that, here, I'll just kind of go to the next slide, help us out, about how diverse the field of OD is. I mean, it's incredibly diverse. We've been doing a lot of research on it and have found so much diversity in the field that it's no wonder that everybody tries to define it in a different way. But there are certain things that hold the field together, and we'll talk about that, but we'll also talk about just how diverse it is. And then what we'll do is sort of go off of what I typically do. And I had a lot of fun creating this piece, and it's about understanding how closely both OD and DE&I are united, both theoretically and practically, and then what types of schools you'd want to focus on if you wanted to transition entirely to DE&I or add DE&I to your repertoire as an OD consultant, whether you're internal or external. And then last but not least, well, actually first, we're going to talk about the assessment tool. Hopefully you took it. If you haven't taken it yet, it takes a little while to take it, but it's certainly worth it because it will give you a lot of information about the types of OD careers that would be interesting to you and fit your preferences and competency, strengths, and interests, kind of like the strengths finders for OD. Oh, great. Thank you for adding those in the chat. How many of you did take the assessment? I just want to get a little bit of a sense. If you did, what is your OD career calling preference? So that name that you get. So in the chat, if you could pop that in, be a kind of a fun starting point. Tiffany, it's a societal game changer. Great, thank you. Now, I already know what many of you are because I've been talking to you about this. But if you haven't, these are a lot of people are new here. Oh, Amber K is asking where you can take the assessment. Well, I'm going to give it to you, but you got to promise not to take it while I'm doing the presentation unless you're really intrigued, because it does take a little while. I'm going to put oh, there's the agenda. I'll just put this in the chat for you. All right, so there's where you can take, oh, Yuling beat me to it. Okay, so let's keep moving here. So one question that I get asked a lot, and I've been asked for, I don't know, 15 to 17 years by a lot of graduate students all over the United States and internationally is, what can I do with an OD degree, right? So like, what can I do if I get some type of an OD degree or a certificate? What can I do? And I sort of back in the day adopted the traditional response, which is, well, you could go and you could do internal consulting, right, with one group. And there are a lot of different names for those sorts of careers. Or you could do external consulting and hop around organizations and clients. And then the old standby was you could just keep going in the position you're in, because OD is great for anybody who is leading change, and change is happening all the time. So good luck with that. And I kind of got tired of that, that response. I don't know. Does that sound familiar to anybody out there? I hear some laughter. Yeah. It's so much more complex than that. And, for a lot of us professors, when we talk to our students who move on 15, 20 years later, what are they doing? It's amazing the diversity that's out there. So, I could tell you this. I don't feel that there is a one size fits all type of OD position. I just don't think that exists. I've been consulting around the world for, I guess, 23 years now. And one thing that I've noticed is that not all of my clients felt like the right fit. Some of them just didn't feel right. The work I was doing didn't feel as meaningful. I may have been good at it, but it didn't feel like fulfilling. And I think you know what I'm talking about. It's the difference between having the competencies and really feeling like this makes you whole. The approach makes you whole. So the question I had is, how do I help OD students and people in the general OD community find jobs that they love? So I ran an experiment one night, went on Google, and I typed in organization development jobs, and tons of jobs came up. And I was absolutely blown away by all of the diversity of jobs out there. And so, long story short, very, very long story short, about 2 years long, with the help of a lot of really wonderful people around the world at Penn State and universities all over the place, we studied careers. We studied definitions of OD. We studied the curriculum of graduate schools of over 144 different institutions that teach OD and OD related work. And it turns out that when you take a real big step back, there's actually like 3 or 4 things that are going on that could help you figure out what types of OD career might be right for you, including OD careers that have to do with DE&I. So there's something very interesting about this presentation, because it not only shows you that you can you could be your own flower in the world of OD, but there are many different ways that OD can be related to DE&I. So it's a story of diversity. And diversity is a beautiful thing. And yet you can feel really lost if you have a lot of diversity going on. You can feel like, where am I? How do I get my bearings straight? So this model is a very, very simple model. I'm going to walk you through it. This is essentially what we are looking at when we measure your career calling preference. So there are 4 different areas here, okay? Outcomes, identity, mastery, and approach. You could read all about it in this Organization Development Review article. Our editor-in-chief for the Organization Development Review is here today. Dave Jamieson, thank you for being here. You can roll up your sleeves and look at all the research, but I wanted this presentation to be very practical. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of these 4 sides. And even if you haven't taken the assessment yet, you'll begin to say, okay, I see where I lean. I see what my preferences are. So the very first one is called outcomes. Now, before I get started with this is not a typology, right? This is not like the Myers-Briggs personality inventory that puts you in a box and says you are an INFP for the rest of your life, right? This is a sort of an assessment to help you get the discussion started, to know where to ignite your interests, which groups are going to feel like better to you than others, and you'll see how this works in a second. So when I put these up, ask yourself, which way do I lean, right? Now you could be both, 2 things at once, of course. It's always an option. However, what we found is that people tend to lean one way or another. All right, so outcomes. Some people, when they do OD, love organizational outcomes. And by that, what I mean is, performance types of outcomes, strategic change types of outcomes, engagement, so on and so forth. Things that influence what the organization calls its bottom line. And that's different for many different organizations. But then there's also a lot of people now who are using OD for societal change. So, the whole entire summit of the OD Summit's nature this year is all about societal change, changing communities, community development, city restoration, sustainability goals, right? So they're working with different types of human systems that are not like your typical organization, right? So you might have a leaning. And when we go through this, I want you to think about what feels right to you. Like if you could wave a magic wand, forget about what you're good at, what you know, just forget about that for a second. What would you do if you could wave a magic wand and do anything? Would you want to change the world? Would you want to help organizations flourish and be vibrant spaces? Okay. Second leaning after that is called identity. Now, this is a really sore subject. So what I'm going to say from the very beginning is that what I'm doing with this assessment is we're looking at things the way they are, not the way the things should be. Okay. So when I talk about identity, there are a lot of pure organization development jobs out there. These are, if you go to like the OD Education Association has this list of essential elements for an OD career. If it checks off all those boxes, right, and you're doing real socio-technical change in an organization, then you might want to be a pure OD consultant, internal or external. However, the truth of the matter is that OD has many more hybrid positions, okay? And hybrid talks about things that do both OD, but bleed over into something else, right? This could bleed over into talent development. It could bleed over into HRD and so on. And this is why, if you look at any of the new competency models for, the Society for Human Resource Management, SIOP, ATD, AHRD, all of these groups incorporate OD as a competency within their framework. Not so much SIOP, but the same is true for OD. A lot of OD positions are now incorporating things from those other areas in its own framework, but it leads with OD. So we call that hybrid, okay? So you got pure and hybrid, and you might have a leaning. All right, next you've got mastery. Some people want to know how to do everything. They want to fill their entire tool belt with what's called full spectrum OD. Then you got other people who just want to learn one approach and they want to do it every single day. And that's okay too. So a real quick example of that is like appreciative inquiry is a very good example of that. Highly popular, and there are people who just do AI. There are also people who just do presencing out of the work that's being done out of the Presencing Institute. And there are numerous others. I won't get into it, but there are some people who want to be like Renaissance consultants. I see Funby, you're a Renaissance consultant. Um, and they have the whole collection of things that they want to do, whereas others come in specialized. All right, so that's another preference. And then finally, we have approach. And this is one of my favorite things to discuss. Again, this is a preference between what I'm calling classic approach. And this is the approach where you're focused on behavioral change and measuring. It's a very positivist epistemology. If you're a geek like me and you like to talk about philosophical origins, diagnostic OD, measuring what's going on, reporting it back, and trying to lead people into change and make that become an impetus for change, and measuring what the results are. So very measurement and behavior oriented. Whereas another leaning is innovative. And these are people who lean more towards dialogic OD. And instead of changing behaviors, what they try to do is change mindsets. In addition to dialogic, OD, you have a whole range of this new area of relatively new area of OD called conscious OD. So the work of Glenda Oyang and Otto Scharmer and myself fit into this innovative category alongside dialogic OD. So you might think, you know what, I kind of like classic, or I kind of lean more toward innovative. Again, most of the time you're doing a little bit of both. However, when you look at the career landscape, it's not as blended. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. It's not as blended. It probably should be. Balance is important. It's a key part of our discussion today. However, there are preferences, and you probably have a leaning. All right, I am going to stop there for a second and ask if we have any questions. I'm going to break the rules and ask for questions first.
I have a question.
Please.
So people may expect that these types or typology, maybe types, may not change over time as much. Like, for example, Myers-Briggs types do not change much, although they change over time. But what's your assumption? Do you think it's your assumption that people end up transitioning from one preference, one like focus to another? What's your position?
Yeah, so I'm glad you said that, because this is the number one piece I like to talk about. People change, and that's why I'm not a big fan of Myers-Briggs. And there's challenges to that as well. Knowing where you are at a particular moment is helpful, though, right? So I'll put out there that if you're new to OD and you're trying to figure out how your career narrative fits OD, thinking back to what you love and what you do, it's a helpful starting point. But certainly there's change. For me, I changed from a very classic approach that focused on organizational change. Now I'm in the innovative approach on societal change. It has fundamentally changed what I do and what I'm interested in, my research agenda, all of that. But I could also see how the opposite might be true, that you might feel that what you love doing is analyzing and digging into the data and playing with artificial intelligence. And so I could see that change happening in the opposite direction as well. However, my secret hope is that everyone can become balanced. Okay. Now, some people don't want to be pure OD folks, right? They like being hybrid, and I think that's fine. All the way down to the point where you're a leader and you don't even have an OD position. It's just a set of competencies that you use. I think balance is always good, generally speaking. The more you know, the more tools you have in your tool belt, the better off. But I don't think everyone has the cognitive capacity for that. This is a long answer, but that's sort of where I am on this so far. I'm curious what you think and what others think about that, because I certainly haven't cornered the market on what this is all about yet. I think somebody had their hand up too.
Yeah, it's me. It's me, Mangalam.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Yes, thank you. So I put myself in the category of classic, right? Because I believe if I change, that others can change. Right? So I will start from there. You know, I live my values, what I believe in. And then even without even just speaking or preaching, you know, people will change. And I have that experience. So I will hold on to that. I don't want to climb on to any other rules. I will hold on to that. So what do you think of that?
Well, I love it. I think that this assessment is for everyone. The whole idea of it with this assessment is that it embraces diversity. It's not trying to ram one form of OD down everyone's throat, but instead it takes a look at what's actually happening in the real world. I would throw out, to your point, that when you feel like you're holding on to something, the question might be, how tightly are you holding on?
Mm.
So if your grip is a little loose, that's good, right? Because you're flexible and you might be able to move back and forth. But if your grip is a little too tight, there might be some room for growth there.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I like to think about it like this real quick. I'll give you a way to think about it real quick, which is on the right side, and right or left, it doesn't matter, but let's imagine a continuum. There are people who really feel like you can't know anything unless you measure it, unless you see real behavior that's observed and you break it down and you stick it in an Excel sheet and you run analytics, right? And there are people, they call it a Cartesian anxiety, right? When it's way off the map. I've got to know how this works. And then on the other side, you have nihilism. It's the part where people live and they say, you can never know anything. You can't step in the same stream twice. This world is, you could never measure it. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
So you have those two poles.
Mhm.
So I guess what I'm saying to you is notice how tightly
Mhm.
your grip
Yeah.
is.
But if those values are moral values, say to be honest, to be unselfishness and transparent, and to have honest conversation always. So we need to hold on to those values. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm so tight. These are my values." But it's a universal. I think whole humanity practice that, isn't it?
That's a lot. That's very heavy, and I love that you brought that up. And I needed an outlet for that because I'm going to give props to my colleague, Dr. Jun Yoon, who wrote a wonderful, wonderful article in the Journal of Applied Behavioral Science about the top values. I don't know if Jun, you're still here, but I'll look for you for inspiration.
Yeah, I mean,
The top values, I think there are 9 values of global OD practitioners in the future. And it's a wonderful article because it outlines, first of all, it was like really well done research, but it outlines these beautiful 9 values. And so what I did as a little hack is when you get your report on the tail end after taking this assessment, there's a tab on your report, no matter what your score is, no matter what your preference is, it says, here are some things you better know, and it's all about values. And it, by the way, Dave Jamieson, one of them is use of self. There's a whole section on use of self, the use of self report. Guess what another one is? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are huge parts. And the third one, I use 3 buckets because it's simple, is dialogic OD. I think everyone should know how to facilitate dialogue if you're doing OD. But those value systems, they're like, they set OD apart. Dave, I don't know if you want to try to dovetail. Dave Jamieson.
you're on mute.
Oh,
Dave?
Sorry.
there you go.
Sometimes the mute is stronger than your finger. Did you ever notice that? Jeez. Anyway, I did have. I mean, I really love this work, and what you're doing, and how critical it'll be for people in the beginning of their careers. And I'm trying to absorb it all at the end of my career. So, what's really interesting is I think what shifts us with those preferences has a lot to do with the experiences that we have as we try to do the work. So the different experiences could guide us very clearly into some of those preferences. And then the second piece that has me a little bit wandering in this is that I think that the deepness of some of the classic stuff is never going to leave my body. However, as I look at the world and the kind of work that we need to do today, and the last 2 or 3 things that I've done, I was looking for creative, innovative answers.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that balance thing still feels good if there's a way to get scores on this, but also feel balanced in the end.
Yeah.
Would be good. Yeah.
And I want to talk to that, Dave, for a second, which is any assessment on its own is like, right? Unless you talk about it. So the power of this assessment is talking about balance. Where might you be a little bit imbalanced, right? Maybe you're like holding on a little too tight to dialogue. That might be, where's the action? Where's the, right? The difference making. And so understanding that in ourselves is a huge part of use of self too. So I love that you model that. I'm gonna keep moving, but keep those questions coming. I love it. This is great. All right, so when you put all these four together, what happens? You actually get just like the Myers-Briggs, although remember, it's not a typology. These are just preferences, okay? You get, let's see, ta-da, you get 16 different preferences, all right? And just to be fun, we gave them names, right? So you might be a humanity hawk or an innovation maven. What does that mean? I'll give you an example. All right, let's say that you are interested in societal outcomes. This is like you're going to school, or maybe you're transitioning and you're like, I've been working in corporate forever. I want to go work for the Peace Corps. I want to go work on sustainable goals, right? And you don't really care so much about being called an organization development specialist. However, what you're doing is fundamentally OD, because you're focusing on social technical influence in systems, right? Whatever that combination looks like. So you might be hybrid minded. And let's say you're also classic, right? So you're thinking about behavior and measurement, and you're I hate to say one trick pony, but you've got one tool that you use like a laser beam, then you're probably a humanity hawk preference, okay? And there are actual careers that align with this preference. So if you analyze jobs out there, so this kind of went both ways. We analyzed jobs to understand these preferences, but then we went back to the jobs so we can understand which jobs fit which preferences. So if you're a humanity hawk, here are a couple examples. Let's do a different one. I think next one is the exact opposite. You're organizational, you're pure OD, you are innovative, and you are a master of all, right? Well, this is where Renaissance consultants live. And Renaissance consultants also have a wide variety of careers that fit that particular preference. What's interesting here, just like some preliminary data, is that if you noticed, compared to humanity hawks, Renaissance consultants have more external consulting opportunities than internal, and vice versa for humanity hawks. So you got to be a pretty innovative company to be hiring a Renaissance consultant to work internally. And that's why I'm not too surprised that Meta has a job description out there for perfect for a Renaissance consultant, or would be appealing. All right, so when you take the assessment, you get an email. Thanks to Yuling. Yuling, if you're out there, I could just hug you because you created this system that works, and I don't know how it works. And I am just so grateful. You take the thing, you take the assessment, you get an email, and it gives you a link. So that link that you see on the top will take you to your report. And the report is entirely geared around your preference. At the same time, if you scroll down, you get a different report. This report looks at your competency, your strengths, and your interests, right? So for instance, you might be interested in a certain competency, but be terrible at it. But you might be like, I could get into this. I want to learn this, right? And you could be really strong at something and never want to do it. I don't know if you can relate to that. There are a lot of things I'm strong at that I would rather not spend any of my day doing, but I happen to be particularly good at it. And the reason this is important is because that enables you, knowing what your preferences are, knowing what you're good at, knowing what your interests are, and knowing what you can get paid for. When you have those four things, by all accounts, especially Eastern perspectives, that's meaningful work. So if you look at the ancient, I'm going to throw out a little philosophy here, the ancient wisdom tradition of Ikigai. Has anybody ever heard of Ikigai? It's actually used a lot. Oh, Dr. Eunice heard of it? It's used often in executive coaching now, helping people find meaningful work. So I'm going to pause and ask for more questions before we get into the DE&I aspect of this. All right, I'm monitoring for hands. I don't see any right now, and that's okay.
I asked a question in the chat.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'm sorry. No, please, Amber, by all
I
means.
was just wondering like how you think OD practitioners, if them being agnostic hurts or helps them as a practitioner.
Okay, so this is a really good question. I don't know. I love them just the same. I would just put it that way. I'm sure there are ways of studying it, but my opinion is very postmodern. I'm not taking like, this is the way you have to do it. It's just, this is what is, and it's multiplex and it's dynamic. But let me ask the question back to you. What do you think? Do you think that OD agnostic might be shooting themselves in the foot, or maybe they have the secret sauce?
I think based on your presentation, I would say that you actually don't think practitioners should be agnostic, breaking down the different type of labels that you've created. But yeah, I think being OD agnostic is actually hurtful to the industry and to the people that the ODs are, the companies and the organizations that are using agnostic practitioners. I mean,
It's interesting. I love the phrasing, because when I think of agnostic, I think of somebody who will believe it when they see it. It's not like they're OD atheists, right? They're not saying, I don't believe in OD, but an agnostic, I'm just thinking of the religious correlation here, is somebody who's like, I'm not going to say I don't believe in OD, but I'll believe it when I see it. Is that how you mean?
Can an agnostic could be also a member of humanity?
Yes, that's where I'm going. Yeah. And it's still like, as a member, like, if we're looking at it through like human rights, right? OD practitioners who are agnostic do not believe in addressing human rights issues because they're agnostic, right?
Wow.
You lost me there.
Wow.
But I can tell you this, let me throw this out there, that this measure, Yuling and I had a chuckle over this, because we had to make sure that when you take this, if you just don't dig OD, you get a little report that says, OD might not be right for you. And it turns out that people who do get that, we're finding that there are patterns that connect them with jobs like HR, traditional talent development. But I'm gonna need to connect with you after to learn more about what you mean when you say OD agnostic, because I'm not quite sure I totally get it yet. But I'm slow, so I
no, it's and honestly, I went to Penn State for the OD program, and it wasn't until I went through that program that I developed that understanding of practitioners in the space, because of the type of debates or discussions I was getting with my professor. And then once I started doing that networking and being part of like these large OD groups, the more global it got, the less agnostic it got. And I feel like in America, especially North America, OD isn't called OD across the pond, right?
It's not called OD in America either.
Okay, good point.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm totally with you.
Yeah. So it felt very like in North America, especially America, the folks who are studying this are approaching it from like a very neutral position, and I say agnostic, and just like she had mentioned, from like a human's perspective. And it feels like the conversations or the interventions, right? The reason I was fighting with my professors were like the interventions, like appreciative inquiry, and really approaching that or applying those things in a global lens, where it was just like, yeah, if you take this outside of America, this is not, and it shouldn't be used in America the way that it's used. But if you take it outside of America, it's even more harmful.
It's
because-
interesting you say that. I'm just going to jump in
Yeah.
wearing my facilitator cap, and I hate to do this because now I'm sort of doing the anti-OD thing, right? I do have a lot more to get through, but I want to just validate something you're saying by mentioning that I recently looked at 98 different definitions of OD since 1965, and I looked at how those definitions evolved over time. And virtually all of them were written by white men. That's the pause for effect. I'm a white man, clearly I'm a white man, but I think common sense would dictate that white men in the United States have a very particular understanding of their world. They have a heteronormative understanding of their world. And so one of the things I love that you're bringing up is that it is different elsewhere. It is called different things. But one thing I don't have enough time to really talk about in this presentation is what holds OD together in all of its manifestations, whatever flower might come up. And on the screen is a little hint. And it is that I subscribe to the Kurt Lewin, the people who wrote about socio-technical systems. And I think that's where it's at. I think that however that manifests, as long as you're looking at the influencing the nexus between people and strategy, you're doing OD. And if you're missing any one of those three, the blue, the red, or the yellow, you're not doing OD. So that's how I kind of look at it. You might end up doing coaching or some other type of, counseling psychology or something like that. So let me get into right now how OD and DE&I are united and where OD practitioners should really focus if they want to develop their skills and either become a real expert at like DE&I, or if they want to transition into being an internal DE&I person. I think it probably goes without saying that, especially with all of our speakers earlier today, that if you want to influence DE&I, you can't just get that checklist out and check off all the check boxes. You also have to influence the social milieu that you hope to influence, right? And so there's this connection between, you can't do it all on the social side or all on the technical side and hope for anything to work. It has to be an integrated effort. And that's exactly how OD approaches its challenges. It looks at systems as socio-technical systems. And as was brought up earlier, values are front and center, okay? And there's a lot of values that are shared between OD and DE&I. Both are involved with stewarding change. And I can let you in on a little conversation I had with Yu Ling. I think it was like last summer or maybe the summer before that, I don't even remember, but we were testing this assessment with people, and a consciousness raiser who took this assessment said to me, "I don't like that you're using the word leading change. It doesn't feel good to me. It doesn't feel right." And my initial reaction was, well, that's what we call it. This is what we call it. Of course, we're going to call it leading and managing change. That's what we're going to call it. But she said, but that's not how I don't look at it like that. I am more of a kind of an iterative, generative thinker. I don't look at it that way. So I changed that to mean stewarding change, because there is a generative aspect there. And I think that's true of DE&I as well. Clearly an emphasis on collaboration, clearly an emphasis on shared outcomes. However, somewhere in this slide deck, I have a QR code. I think it's coming up very soon. It's a QR code to a LinkedIn article I wrote about why DE&I efforts fail. And there's a lot of research that shows that DE&I efforts fail far more often than they succeed. And it's precisely because they're missing these points. So I pulled from research, and you can look at that later. So there's the article right there, how OD is transforming DE&I. And that's a little dated. I think I published that a couple of years ago, but it's definitely worth checking out. And this whole slide deck will be available to you as well. So what are the things that you want to develop if you're thinking about getting into DE&I? Well, these are the big ones right here. And the last two bullet points you see there are kind of helpful anyway, even if you were just doing, you know, organization development on its own, those are worth developing. Not everybody knows them, but I've always found both of those final two to be incredibly helpful, having a multiplier effect on interventions that I've done. But the first four are the ones that we're going to focus on today. So if you're an OD consultant, you love OD, and you're like, you know what, I dig what I've been learning today, I want to get into DE&I. These are the four areas, and I'm going to kind of go through them relatively quickly. So intercultural competence, you've heard that earlier today. It's the ability to understand, appreciate, and effectively work with people from diverse backgrounds. Much harder than it sounds. But this is something that's really important. This has been woven into global OD competency frameworks, but for all intents and purposes, we're not there yet in the OD community. So this is something you want to check out. Here are some examples of certificate programs that do intercultural competency training that are particularly interesting to OD professionals. So if you're thinking, yeah, I need to develop that, here are some places you can do it. And then you have data analysis, which is, I think this has been brought up in almost every single presentation, the idea of measurement. And this is absolutely crucial. There is so much data out there where people are analyzing the return on investment and, you know, net promoter scores and all these different forms of ROI. But just as important as it is to understand how to calculate it is to critique it, because a lot of times they're not accurate. So understanding how to analyze data is very important. Here are a few different assessments and audits that are done. You might check these out. Oh, I listed the intercultural development inventory twice because I must really like it. It's actually one of the most popular ones out there. The downside of it is that it assesses the socio and technical, but it doesn't do any influence. It sort of gives you the results and then asks you to sort of figure it out and says, here's what your results are. So that wouldn't necessarily be OD, but I think they're changing. And DE&I theory and research is really important. Understanding the origins, particularly of traditionally marginalized populations in the United States, and even understanding things like, I think fascinating, like what Dr. Li Lu was talking about with different perspectives from Asia. It's fascinating. Or I could summon the work of Bill Rothwell, Dr. Rothwell, who talks about multiculturalism. It's very different. It's a different type of look at this. And here are some helpful books and resources, particularly if you're doing this work in the United States. So just to frame it that way. Okay. And again, you'll get this later on. And my favorite one of all is A Course I Teach. Of course, I love it. It's called Transformative Learning. And the idea is that if you really want to create change on this scale, where you're dealing with landmines and biases, and there's all kinds of biases and anxieties, people fear opening up, there are issues of psychological safety and so on and so forth. Transformative learning in a nutshell says that if you really want to challenge your assumptions and let go of your anxieties, it requires a safe space, but it also often requires challenge. It requires shaking things up, like Tanya was talking about earlier today. And one of the things that you see, it happens all the time, is people tend to lean more on the challenge piece, or they tend to lean more on the support piece. But if you lean too far in either direction, you're not being transformative. A good holding environment for transformative learning has both supports and challenges. And here are some great, this is just a few. if you connect with me on LinkedIn, there's going to be a lot more coming out in terms of tools that you can use, but these are some of my favorite ones to foster transformative dialogue. And that's it. I know it was kind of a quick presentation. I wanted to get a lot in, but let me throw it back to you for more questions.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah.
Not a question, it's a comment. I say that for this transformative learning, but one thing very important is silence and inner listening. Our personal, we need to start with that if you can. Give time and think of yourself every day. What am I doing, but how can I change myself? Is there anything that I have to improve in myself? So that quiet time, little bit of, I don't know whether it is mindfulness, but I will use that quiet time in a listening is very important.
I love that. Are there any tools that you use or methods that you find?
Yeah. Like, for example, you say, because I belong to an organization called Initiatives of Change, whose philosophy is you want change in the world, you be the change, like Gandhi. So we spend time, half an hour, or if you like, more time, and take some values like honesty, unselfishness, purity of intention. Just ask ourselves, how far have I been honest today or unselfish? So every day, it will take time, because being quiet, we are bombarded with information every day, whole day. So to take that 5 minutes, I tried, and I can tell you, because I found it difficult to be silenced, with all the thoughts that come from right and left. But then I have been practicing this, so it has become part of myself now. I'm transparent enough, even to have an honest conversation. How often I pretend, not being honest, or, so though I think those things help us. I mean, in other words, you say, we need to have some kind of a spirituality in us to really have this transformation in us.
I love it. It makes me think immediately of use of self. And we have the expert of all experts on Zoom right now. Being mindful in those quiet moments, but also in the moment, right? When you're forced with a tough decision.
Yeah.
Imagine just like, hiring somebody, and you're sitting across from, let's say, an African American man, and noticing when your biases come up, and instead of judging them and feeling terrible and then not reflecting on them, is saying, that's how my brain is working right now. There is a bias. I'm going to recognize it. And maybe instead of trying to tackle it and wrestle it, I'm going to let go of it. And I'm going to come right back to this man who's sitting in front of me. And I'm going to embrace him with deep listening.
Or think of something positive of that person without judging.
Yeah.
I really do. I do want to support what was brought up here, because this is really powerful. In use of self, we call it the pause principle a lot. There's a book called The Pause Principle, and it was written by a leadership guy who's trying to get leaders to learn how to pause. Basically.
Kevin Cashman is his name.
Kevin, yeah, okay. And so, but the other way to think about it is, where I've found it really powerful is that most of our use of self occurs situationally. We move from situation to situation to situation. And so what a pause will do, in the same way that you're saying, take a half an hour, I'm helping people learn how to do it in much shorter time periods. But the idea is, you need to bring your consciousness, your presence, and your intention to what you're entering. And when you do that, you sometimes think about different choices than if you just walk in a hurry, and then all you have available is your habitual behavior. That's the reason for it. Yeah.
And if I were to balance both of what you're talking about, if you take the intentional doing it, flexing it, strengthening that on the side, and also doing it situationally, that's conscious OD theory. So if you're this like sounds good to you, check it out.
Yeah.
I think somebody else, maybe it was
Yeah, I wanted to add the technical parts to that because, I mean, I feel like a lot of this is we're relying on humans to not be human. And how do we force people into pauses? And force people into those intentions. And I think like the technical like the design of your organization, right? You have to build in those pauses. The same way we have to build in mental health and make people take time off is the same, the same reaction we should have in regards to building in those pauses and say like in your data collection, in your decision making, in your policy making, in the enforcement of your policies or procedures, there isn't an option to pause. You have to take this information in because humans are humans.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well said.
It's true. That's true.
Isa, I think you're talking, but I think you're muted, unless you're talking to someone else.
Yes, I'm talking here at the control room.
Okay. I can never tell. Any other thoughts? I want to encourage you, if you haven't taken the assessment, take it. I'd love to know what you think. We're always improving it. And the more people who take it gives us more data to look at it and improve even further. I know it's been helpful in coaching and discussions in classes. And if you have any questions for me, just feel free. I'd love to talk about this stuff, as you can tell. I guess, I don't know, like, do we have like another 8 minutes? Are we allowed to hang out and talk? I don't want to ruin it if it's.
We have to get ready for the next presentation also.
Okay.
Yes. So we have 2 minutes left if we have anything else. Otherwise, we're gonna put Dr. Brendel's email here, so just you can get connected, raise any questions, and the link already has been posted here in the chat to the OD&C open source website, where you can go and have further information and get connected with the team who worked with Dr. Brendel.
Thank you, Asa. I appreciate it. And it's so good to see all the faces. I love all your faces. All of you beautiful people. Tanya, I see you. Tenyet, Farhan, John Holst is here. Brian, oh my goodness. Thank you for coming, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brendel.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brendel.
So we have Dr. Brendel's email in the chat, please. You can get connected. And also we have that chat, the link for the website for the open source OD that was shared earlier by our media committee. So let's move to the next.